Alex, a recent college graduate, was staring at his resume, his fingers nervously tracing over the words. He had spent countless hours perfecting it, but still a wave of anxiety washed over him. Despite all his achievements, he couldn't shake the feeling that his lack of real-world experience might hold him back. This was the moment, his chance to prove that he was more than just a degree. Today, he had a job interview at one of the top tech companies in the city, and it felt like everything he had worked for was leading up to this day. Sitting in the crowded train, Alex tried to focus, but the hum of the morning commute and the bustling crowd around him made it difficult to concentrate. He kept glancing at his resume, convinced he might have missed something important. Was this the right format? Did his skills come across the way he wanted them to? He felt both hopeful and uncertain. The job market was competitive, and while he had the qualifications, he didn't know if that would be enough. As the train rumbled on, Alex knew one thing for certain: he had to make the best impression he could, no matter how nervous he was. He took a deep breath and reminded himself that this was his chance, his one shot at starting his career. With his palms slightly sweaty, Alex closed his eyes for a moment, preparing for whatever was to come. Alex settled into his seat, the rhythmic clatter of the train's wheels against the tracks blending with the quiet murmur of passengers. The early morning rush had filled the car with commuters, each person absorbed in their own world, some scrolling through their phones, others buried in books or newspapers. Alex, however, couldn't focus on anything except his resume. His fingers instinctively traced the bold letters of his name at the top of the page, but his mind was a whirlwind of self-doubt. He'd polished it meticulously the night before, yet now it felt inadequate, like it didn't quite capture who he was or what he could offer. He glanced up at the passing scenery outside, watching as the cityscape blurred into nothingness. The train swayed slightly, a subtle reminder of the unpredictable nature of life. Alex's eyes refocused on the paper, but the words felt distant now. The job he was interviewing for was exactly the kind of position he had dreamed of, yet his nerves refused to calm. Would his technical skills be enough? He had studied for years, worked on countless projects during school, but he still felt so green, inexperienced, like the industry was a vast ocean and he was barely treading water. Alex glanced at the clock on his phone, mentally running through his schedule. He had arrived early to the station, giving himself plenty of time to prepare for the interview. But now, with the minutes ticking away, the quiet hum of the train felt suffocating. He couldn't help but replay his worries over and over again. The thought of facing a panel of seasoned professionals questioning his every move sent a shiver down his spine. Still, he had to keep his cool. He had practiced his answers 1,000 times, rehearsed his introduction until it sounded just right, but it was impossible to predict how things would unfold. Focus, Alex muttered under his breath, taking a slow, deep breath. The sound of the train's horn as it entered the next station broke him from his thoughts. For a moment, Alex let his eyes drift to the people around him, trying to imagine the lives they were leading. Were they facing similar anxieties? Maybe the woman reading a book was also heading to a big meeting. Maybe the businessman in the corner was preparing for a presentation that could change his career. In a city like this, everyone had their own challenges to overcome, and Alex reminded himself that this was just one step in a much larger journey. Despite the uncertainty gnawing at him, Alex forced himself to stop overthinking. He closed his resume, shoved it back into his bag, and decided that worrying wouldn't get him anywhere. What was done was done. All he could do now was show up, be himself, and hope for the best. The train continued to roll forward, and Alex couldn't help but wonder what the future would hold. As the train rumbled on, Alex found himself sinking deeper into his thoughts, the surrounding noise becoming a distant hum. His eyes were fixed on the resume again, his mind looping through potential questions and answers for the interview. It felt like time was dragging and his nerves were starting to get the better of him. That's when the man sitting next to him shifted slightly, and for the first time, Alex noticed him. The man was in his mid-40s, dressed in a well-tailored suit that screamed confidence and success. His glasses rested on the edge of his nose, and he was staring at his phone, probably reading the news or checking emails. He seemed like just another typical commuter lost in his own world. But then, as the train made another stop, the man glanced over at Alex's resume, which had slipped out of his bag and was resting partially visible on the seat between them. "Is that a resume I see?" the man asked, his voice warm and casual. Alex, a little startled, nodded and quickly tried to shuffle the papers back into his bag, feeling suddenly self-conscious. But the man smiled a friendly, disarming smile and didn't seem bothered at all by the interruption. "Don't worry, I'm not here to judge," he chuckled. "I used to be in the same position when I was starting out." Alex felt his anxiety lift just slightly at the man's kind tone. "Yeah, I've got an interview coming up," Alex said, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's for a tech position at a company I've been wanting to work for." The man nodded, his eyes lighting up with interest. "Ah, tech industry. Exciting stuff. You don't mind me asking, which company?" Alex, unsure if he should mention the company name, hesitated for a moment. Then, thinking it couldn't hurt to be open, he replied, "It's company name. I've been preparing for this interview for weeks." The man's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, that's funny," he said, looking genuinely surprised. "I know that company very well. In fact, I'm actually one of the hiring managers there." Alex's heart skipped a beat. He blinked, trying to process what he'd just heard. "Wait, what?" His voice came out in a rush, but the man's expression was completely calm, as if this kind of coincidence happened every day. "I know it sounds crazy," the man continued, chuckling at Alex's reaction. "I'm Richard, by the way. I work in the recruitment department. So you're applying for a position in tech, huh? That's fantastic. What role?" Alex's mind was spinning. Richard, one of the people who could make or break his career, was sitting right next to him, just casually talking like it was no big deal. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. This was the kind of situation you never prepared for. "Well," Alex stammered, "it's for a junior software developer role. I've worked on a few projects during college," but Richard raised his hand, stopping him. "Don't worry. I wasn't going to ask about your qualifications just yet." He leaned back slightly, his tone turning more thoughtful. "I always prefer to get to know the person first. You can have all the technical skills in the world, but if you don't fit with the team, it's not going to work." Alex blinked, unsure how to react. This wasn't a typical conversation with a stranger on the train. He'd been expecting to hear standard formal questions about his resume, but instead, Richard seemed to be genuinely interested in him as a person. "So tell me," Richard said, his gaze now fixed on Alex, "what made you want to apply for this position? What's driving you to join our company?" For the next few minutes, Alex found himself telling Richard about his passion for technology, his desire to work in a fast-paced environment, and his eagerness to contribute to projects that made a real difference. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and before Alex knew it, he had forgotten all about his nervousness. Richard wasn't just asking the usual questions. He was listening, understanding, and genuinely engaging with him. The train continued its journey, the rhythmic sound of the wheels on the tracks almost like a background score to their unexpected exchange. Alex couldn't believe his luck. Here he was talking with one of the people who could decide his future. And it didn't feel like a formal interview at all. It felt like a conversation between two people, both trying to figure out if they could work well together. Finally, as the train approached the next station, Richard stood up, ready to get off. He turned to Alex with a smile. "Well, this was a nice chat. I'll see you later this afternoon, I suppose," he said casually. Alex could barely process what had just happened. "Wait, what?" Richard gave him a knowing look and grinned. "I'm the one who's going to interview you today. Just thought I'd give you a little preview." As Richard stepped off the train, Alex sat there still in shock. He'd just had an impromptu pre-interview with his potential future boss. The reality of the situation was starting to sink in, and Alex couldn't help but laugh to himself. This was going to be one interview he would never forget. Alex sat there still trying to process what had just happened. His heart was racing, and he felt a strange mix of disbelief and excitement coursing through him. Was this really happening? Just a few moments ago, he had been nervously preparing for an interview, his mind filled with doubts and what-ifs. And now here he was, having an unexpected conversation with none other than Richard, one of the hiring managers at the very company he was applying to. It felt surreal. How many people could say they had a pre-interview on the way to their actual interview? Alex had never imagined this scenario in a million years. The world seemed to shrink in that moment, as if fate had orchestrated this encounter to make him realize something important. He'd heard about these kinds of crazy coincidences, people meeting their future bosses by accident. But this felt different. This wasn't just luck. This was an opportunity, a glimpse into what the future might hold. Alex's mind raced, replaying their conversation. Richard had been surprisingly down to earth, asking about his passion for tech, his goals, and his aspirations. It wasn't the typical cold, calculated interview that Alex had braced himself for. Instead, it was almost like a casual chat. But with so much weight behind it, Richard hadn't just asked about his skills. He'd seemed interested in who Alex was as a person, what motivated him, and why he wanted to be part of their team. It was as if he was already assessing whether Alex would fit into the culture, not just the job. The reality of the situation hit him hard. He wasn't just preparing for any interview. This was the interview, the one that could change everything. A part of him still couldn't believe it. Had he really just been speaking to someone who could decide his fate? The entire experience felt like a whirlwind, surprising, exhilarating, and overwhelming all at once. As the train approached his stop, Alex couldn't help but feel a surge of confidence that he hadn't felt before. Sure, he still had to go through the official interview, but this moment had already given him a head start. He had an edge. Maybe this was fate's way of testing him, or maybe it was just a twist of luck. Either way, Alex knew one thing for sure: this would be an interview unlike any other. The train ride had ended, but the shock still hadn't worn off. Alex stood there rooted to the spot as Richard stepped off the train. The world around him seemed to slow down as he processed the unexpected twist of fate. The pre-interview had been a surreal, almost dreamlike experience, but now reality was hitting him hard. He had just spoken to the person who would be assessing his future in the company. No pressure, right? Alex shook his head, trying to regain his composure. The train door slid closed behind him, and he stepped off the platform with the rest of the commuters still in a daze. He had no idea what the official interview would hold, but one thing was certain: his nerves had shifted from anxiety to something else entirely. It wasn't just about his qualifications anymore. It was about something deeper. As he walked to the building where the interview was being held, his mind kept returning to their conversation. Richard had been surprisingly personable. He hadn't bombarded Alex with dry, impersonal questions about technical skills or previous experience. Instead, he had asked about Alex's passion for the field, his vision for the future, and the kind of impact he hoped to make. It had felt less like a formal interview and more like a conversation between two people trying to figure out if they were a good fit for one another. By the time Alex entered the building and was ushered into the interview room, the surreal feeling hadn't entirely worn off. He sat down at the table, shaking hands with the two other interviewers who had been assigned to assess his application. But it was Richard who caught his eye immediately. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, a shared moment that couldn't be replicated in a typical interview setting. The sense of camaraderie that had formed on the train was still hanging in the air, and Alex could tell that Richard was looking at him with a different kind of expectation, one that was far less formal than he had anticipated. The interview began, and for a while it felt like any other. The interviewers asked Alex about his experience, his technical skills, and his ability to work under pressure. He answered confidently, but what stood out most to him was Richard's subtle smile, almost like a silent encouragement. It was as if Richard had already seen what he needed to see and wasn't going to let the formalities of the interview get in the way. At times, the conversation even veered away from the typical questions, and the group started discussing broader topics like the tech industry's evolution and the kind of company culture they were striving to build. Alex felt a spark of excitement in those moments, realizing that this wasn't just a job for him. It was an opportunity to be part of something bigger. As the interview continued, Alex began to relax. The pressure he had felt earlier had dissipated, replaced by a sense of ease he hadn't expected. He found himself not just answering questions, but engaging in a genuine conversation about the future of technology, his place in it, and what kind of team he wanted to be a part of. Richard and the others didn't feel like distant interviewers anymore. They felt like colleagues discussing potential collaborations. Eventually, the interview came to an end. Richard gave him a nod as if to signal that this had been more than just a formal assessment. As the group thanked Alex for his time and stood to leave, Richard caught his eye once more. "I'm glad we had the chance to chat earlier," he said with a wink. "It made this whole process a lot easier, don't you think?" Alex, now fully aware of the unique situation he had found himself in, smiled back. "Yeah, definitely," he replied, his heart finally settling into a more confident rhythm. As Alex walked out of the room, he couldn't help but think about how different this interview had been from anything he had ever imagined. What started as a simple conversation on the train had evolved into something much more significant, an experience that would shape his career. Whether or not he would get the job didn't matter as much anymore. What mattered was the connection he had made, the genuine exchange of ideas, and the realization that he wasn't just another candidate in a pile of resumes. He was a person, someone who could make a real impact, and it felt like Richard and the team had seen that. For the first time in a long while, Alex felt a surge of optimism. Whatever came next, he knew this was just the beginning. Days passed after the interview, but the memory of that train ride lingered in Alex's mind like a scene from a movie. He replayed the moment Richard introduced himself, the ease of their conversation, the calm yet focused way the interview had gone every time his phone buzzed. A wave of nervous anticipation washed over him, until finally the call came. "Hi, Alex, it's Richard." Alex's breath caught in his throat. "I wanted to call you personally." Richard continued, his voice steady but warm. "We were really impressed both during the interview and before it. You brought more than just a resume. You brought energy, honesty, and heart. That's exactly what we're looking for." Alex felt a slow, stunned smile spread across his face. "So, if you're still interested," Richard added, "we'd like to officially offer you the position." For a moment, Alex couldn't speak. 1,000 thoughts flooded his mind: relief, joy, disbelief. He had hoped for this, dreamed of it. But nothing could have prepared him for the reality of hearing those words. After a beat, he responded, his voice slightly shaky. "Yes, absolutely, I'd love to accept." After the call ended, Alex sat back and let it all sink in. The pressure, the anxiety, the self-doubt, they were gone. What remained was a quiet, profound sense of fulfillment. This wasn't just about getting a job. It was about being seen. He thought back to the younger version of himself sitting on the train that morning, clutching his resume like a lifeline. He had felt like just another anonymous candidate trying to stand out in a world that moved too fast to notice people like him. But fate, or maybe something greater, had stepped in. That spontaneous encounter, that single moment of vulnerability, had shifted everything. In the days that followed, Alex prepared to begin his new chapter. He met more team members, settled into the office environment, and slowly began to find his place. Richard, true to form, didn't treat him like a junior employee. He treated him like a partner, someone with potential and voice. Their relationship, built on that one unexpected meeting, continued to evolve with mutual respect and openness. More than once, Richard would joke during meetings, "Be careful who you sit next to on a train. They might just end up being your next great hire." The others would laugh, but Alex knew there was truth in that story, a truth that reminded him how unpredictable life could be and how sometimes the most important doors open. Not because you knock, but because someone happened to glance your way at just the right moment. Looking back, Alex realized the lesson wasn't just about seizing opportunity. It was about showing up, being present even when you're nervous, carrying your story, your values, and your hope with you, even when it seems no one is watching.